Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am bringing you week 19 of my 2019 reads. It was another great reading week. I finished 4 books, all of which I really enjoyed. The first book that I finished was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And this is part of the Wayfarers series. It's the first book. I was really in the mood for something a little bit lighthearted and optimistic this week, and this book really hit the spot. It follows a group of multi-species crew members on a ship that digs wormholes through space to connect various areas, and they get a contract to go quite a far distance away, where it takes them over a year to get there in order to build a wormhole. And this sort of follows the characters throughout that year as they have various interactions and really focuses a lot on character depth. I think that this book did such a good job of world building, of creating this future of humanity integrating with all of these other galactic common groups and species, and how would that fit? How would humanity fit into that? What would these other beings be like? So it was very cool world building, and the book itself addressed so many interesting issues of things like, what are the ethics of AIs being human or not human? What are the ethics of cloning? How do you interact with other species when their values and culture is so different from yours? Is suicide an okay thing? Is kind of multiple partners okay? Just so many very different issues, lots of curious things about sexuality and about kind of what makes somebody human, or even not human, but a sapient, a being who we can see as equals and interact with. So lots of very cool, interesting issues and dynamics between species were covered in this book. I think that it really reminded me of just watching a season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is very sweet. It's great. It follows a lot of positive themes, so it really worked for me. I think that the only downside to this book was maybe that it was so episodic. So really, rather than having a big cohesive storyline like you would expect in most novels or like a movie, this was more like a series where every couple of chapters you would have a different character who you followed as they went through some sort of experience or adventure or growth period, or you learned about their background or something like that. So it felt very much like an episode of TV. Even so, I thought that this book was a lot of fun, really sweet and hopeful and optimistic and great sci-fi. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished the second book in the Wayfarers series, A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. So it continues from the point where the first book left off, but it follows different characters. So it follows 2 characters that were introduced in the first book who end up going together off to a different place, and it explores the history of one of them and the sort of growth and future of the other. So the history it explores is of Pepper. And Pepper is someone who grew up on a planet where she was a genetically modified human, where that world was split into humans who got to experience and enjoy all the benefits of the world, and genetically modified humans who were basically slaves, just there to sort trash and make things reusable. So she was one of those and grew up in very extreme neglect. She ended up running away, but that story of her process of getting away is very harrowing, and again, lots of isolation, lots of neglect, lots of just surviving through very difficult experiences. The other storyline that it follows is that of Sidra. And Sidra is an AI who is supposed to be running a ship, but she needs to leave her ship, and so she ends up in a body kit, which is a human-looking body that she can pretend to be human in. However, this is not legal. So this is kind of all done running under the radar, and she has to pretend to be human, even though this is very, very different from what she's used to. And there's a lot of issues of body dysmorphia and how she copes with being in this body that is very different from who she truly is, you know, as a spaceship AI. Lots of issues as well about, you know, what makes somebody human? Is an AI human? What if they're not treated as a human? What prejudices exist against them? Also lots of interesting issues about gender, about sexuality, just really cool themes that are introduced and explored in this book. I think that the tone of this book, though, is much more serious and much darker than the first book. And there was so much angst that occurred in this for both Pepper and for Sidra. It sort of felt like they were going through their teenagehood. Pepper definitely was, but Sidra was, you know, she's an AI, so she doesn't quite have a teenagehood. But it felt like they were going through the angst and the rebellion and the frustration with their situations of teenagehood. So there's a lot of kind of difficult issues as well as difficult emotions that are explored in this, and a little bit darker of a book, which wasn't necessarily what I was in the mood for this week. Maybe if I had read it at a different time, it would have clicked more with me. But as it was, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished His Last Bow by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and this is one of the later collections of Sherlock Holmes short stories. My husband has been reading me these short stories for the past year and a half as bedtime stories, so I am maybe not the most critical reader when it comes to these because I'm half asleep when I hear them, but I really enjoyed this collection. I think the Sherlock Holmes stories follow a nice, cute little pattern, and it's fun to see the interaction of Sherlock and other characters. Watson, you always just feel like, you know, you need to get out of this relationship because Sherlock does not treat you well. But it's just a cute, fun series, and I really enjoyed this collection of short stories, just like I have most of the previous collections. So as a somewhat half asleep reader, I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, I finished Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. And this is something that was on my TBR for May for Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which I will link the playlist to below. I was very happy to get a chance to read this because I'd heard such good things about it. Also, I was just happy to get anything off of my TBR for May read because the wait list on almost all of the books that I chose is so long that I don't think I'm going to get most of them in May. Oh well. Anyway, so I read this collection, and if you have ever seen the movie Arrival with Amy Adams, that is based on one of the short stories in this book. I think that this was such a cool collection. I mean, when I was reading it, I didn't even know what to think half the time because my mind was so filled with questions. When I think of the term speculative fiction, this is what I think of, because everything about it, it speculates. It takes a what if, you know, what if this were the case, or this technology existed, or this thing occurred? Then what would be the next steps? What would people do? How would people react? How would the world change? And it just follows things all the way down to their logical conclusion. And through the course of these sort of thought experiments, Chiang really raises so many different questions that really are about humanity, about ethics, about values, about, you know, what is the consequence of doing various actions if we build this technology? How will that affect us in the long term? How will our society change? Does that really mesh with what we want and what we value? So lots of super just thought-provoking questions were raised in all of these stories. I think there's something on the order of like 6 or 7 stories, and each one felt very distinct to me, where they explore a very different what if. Some of them take place in sort of very ancient history, Babylonian times. Some of them take place, you know, in the future, but all of them, interestingly enough, take place on Earth. None of this takes place in space, which I thought was very cool for a sci-fi. So this collection was amazing. Everybody, I think, knows that it's amazing. It's really well regarded across all readers. And the cool thing too is that Ted Chiang just came out with a new collection called Exhalation. And I think there's a bunch of people who are going to start reviewing that soon, so I can't wait to hear what they think. I have put a hold on it. It'll take forever to get it through my library, but I really love this collection so much that I am going to do a separate review for Stories of Your Life and Others later this week, where I talk a little bit more about what those questions were that it raised. It's an awesome collection, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, that wraps up week 19 for me. I hope that you had a great reading week as well. If you've read any of the books that I've talked about, or you're interested in them, or you want to discuss them, please leave a comment below.